40,000 years ago. Northern Iraq, a Neanderthal hunter walks home through the valley, almost safe, almost there. Then, movement in the shadows. Sharp pain between his ribs, a stone-tipped spear, thrust upward, into his lung. He falls. The weapon stays lodged in his body. 50,000 years later, in 1960, archaeologist Ralph Selecki will extract this rib from the cave floor. He will study the wound under microscopes, measure every angle, every fracture pattern, and he will reach a chilling conclusion. This was not an accident, not an animal attack. This was murder. Deliberate, calculated. The first documented homicide in human history. But the killer's identity, that is where this story gets complicated. Because across Europe, archaeologists are finding evidence of something far more disturbing than a single murder. Mass graves. 80 bodies in one cave in Croatia. Bones systematically processed. Cut marks, fractures. Some showing signs of fire. Was it cannibalism? Starvation, driving desperate acts, or something darker? Rituals we cannot begin to understand. And then, in a cave in Siberia, scientists discover a single bone fragment, 2 centimeters long, from a 13-year-old girl who died 90,000 years ago. They extract her DNA, and what they find changes everything. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father belonged to a completely different species. Denisovan. This is not a story about hate. This is Romeo and Juliet. Across species boundaries. A love so powerful it created children who bridged 2 worlds separated by 400,000 years of evolution. So if we loved them enough to create families, why did every single Neanderthal disappear exactly 40,000 years ago? 2010. Leipzig, Germany. A Swedish scientist named Svante Pääbo announces he has done the impossible. He has sequenced the complete genome of a Neanderthal, read 3 billion letters of DNA from someone who died 50,000 years ago. And what he discovered will force us to rewrite everything we thought we knew about human evolution. This is not a simple murder case. This is a story about love and violence happening simultaneously, about species boundaries that blurred in ways we never imagined, about a crime so complex it took 50,000 years to solve. And the evidence? It lives inside you. This is the investigation into the greatest unsolved mystery in human evolution. Who killed the Neanderthals? And why does the answer matter more today than ever before? Before we can solve this crime, we need to understand the victim. For 150 years, we imagined Neanderthals wrong, brutish, stupid, hunched cavemen, barely smarter than animals. But the bones tell a different story. 1953, Shanidar Cave, northern Iraq. American archaeologist Ralph Selecki discovers a burial. Deliberate, careful. The skeleton is surrounded by pollen. From flowers, hyacinths, cornflowers, hollyhocks. Someone placed these flowers around this body 40,000 years ago. This is not an animal. This is someone who understood death, who mourned, who believed in something beyond. That same cave held an even more remarkable discovery. Another skeleton, Shanidar I, about 40 years old when he died. He was blind in his right eye. His right arm had been amputated, possibly at birth. Severe limp, most teeth missing. Deaf in one ear. He should have died before age 5. But he lived to 40 because his tribe fed him, protected him, carried him for decades. This is compassion. This is humanity. Their brains were bigger than ours. They controlled fire, made sophisticated tools, hunted woolly mammoths, created musical instruments, carved symbols into cave walls. They survived 300,000 years, through ice ages that would have killed us. They were not failing. They were thriving, perfectly adapted. So what happened? Why did they disappear exactly when we arrived in Europe? Shanidar III, the murder victim, was not isolated. Across Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, we find the same evidence. Violence, trauma, broken bones. 1979, Saint-Césaire, France. A Neanderthal skull. CT scans reveal a healed cranial fracture from a sharp blade. Someone struck them with intent to kill. But the bone healed. Their tribe nursed them back to health, violence and compassion, simultaneously. 1899. Krapina, northern Croatia. The largest Neanderthal site ever discovered. 80 individuals. 900 bone fragments. The bones show systematic processing. Cut marks. Skulls fractured to extract brains. Long bones split for marrow. Ribs showing defleshing marks. Some burned. The same patterns we see when humans butcher animals. For 125 years, scientists have debated what happened. Cannibalism during starvation. But this was a warm period. Game was plentiful. Ritual defleshing for burial. Some cultures separate flesh from bone as sacred ceremony, or warfare between tribes. Site after site. Broken skulls, fractured bones, healed wounds requiring care, unhealed wounds meaning death. And then, 40,000 years ago, they are gone. Vanished. From Spain to Siberia. An entire species. Extinct. This was not a gradual decline. This was not natural old age for a species. Something happened. Something catastrophic. Something that left only us standing. In any investigation, you start with suspects. Who had means, motive, and opportunity? Suspect number 1. Climate change. Between 60,000 and 40,000 years ago, Earth's climate became unstable. Ice ages alternating with warming periods. Rapid shifts. Forests turning to tundra. Tundra turning to grassland. The animals Neanderthals depended on, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, began disappearing. Could climate change have pushed them over the edge, made them vulnerable, reduced their food supply until they could not sustain their population? Suspect number 2. Disease. Modern humans originated in Africa. We evolved with African diseases, African parasites, African viruses. When we left Africa and entered Europe, we may have brought plagues Neanderthals had never encountered. We know this happened in history. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought smallpox, measles, influenza, diseases that killed 90% of the Native American population, not through direct violence, but through invisible pathogens. Could we have done the same to Neanderthals? Suspect number 3. Competition. 40,000 years ago, a new predator arrived in Europe. Homo sapiens, modern humans, us. We had better weapons, stone-tipped spears that could be thrown from a distance, possibly early atlatls, spear throwers that extended our range. Eventually, bows and arrows. Neanderthals used thrusting spears, close-range weapons. They had to get within meters of a mammoth to kill it. We could kill from 30 meters away, safer, more efficient. We had more complex social structures, larger tribes, trade networks stretching hundreds of kilometers. We shared knowledge. Innovations spread quickly through our populations. Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups, 15 to 30 individuals, rarely traveling more than 50 kilometers from their birthplace. Did we simply outcompete them? Take their hunting grounds? Drive them into marginal territories where they could not survive? Or did we do something worse? Did we hunt them? Kill them deliberately? Wage war against them as we have waged war against each other throughout history? To answer these questions, Svante Pääbo needed to do something unprecedented. He needed to bring a Neanderthal back to life, not literally, but genetically. He needed to read their DNA, all 3 billion letters of their genome, and in 2010, he did it. He announced to the world that he had successfully sequenced the complete Neanderthal genome. What he discovered would change everything we thought we knew about human evolution. It would complicate this investigation beyond anything anyone expected, because the evidence would show we did not just kill them, we loved them. The announcement came on May 7th, 2010, a press conference that would change everything we thought we knew about human evolution. Svante Pääbo stood before the world's media. Behind him, a screen showed strings of letters. A, T, G, C. The building blocks of DNA, but not just any DNA. This was the complete genome of a Neanderthal who died in Vindiga Cave, Croatia, 50,000 years ago. 20 years of failures had led to this moment. 20 years of contaminated samples, degraded DNA, sequences that made no sense. Scientists told Pabo it was impossible. Ancient DNA breaks down. After a few thousand years, there should be nothing left to read. But he kept trying, developing new techniques, new ways to extract microscopic fragments of genetic material from fossilized bone, new methods to distinguish ancient DNA from modern contamination, and finally, success. But as Pabo analyzed the data, he noticed something unexpected, something that should not be there. Sections of the Neanderthal genome looked familiar, too familiar. He compared them to modern human DNA, European genomes, Asian genomes, African genomes, and there it was, clear as day. Europeans and Asians carried DNA sequences identical to this 50,000-year-old Neanderthal. Not similar, identical, the exact same genetic code. But Africans did not. There was only one explanation, one way this could happen. Pabo took a breath and made the announcement. Approximately 2 to 4% of DNA in people of European and Asian descent is Neanderthal. This means that Neanderthals and modern humans did not simply coexist. They interbred. They had children together. And those children survived, had their own children, and passed Neanderthal genes down through thousands of generations. To us, the room erupted. Journalists shouting questions. Scientists demanding to see the data. Skeptics claiming contamination. For decades, the dominant theory in human evolution was called out of Africa. It stated that modern humans evolved in Africa around 200,000 years ago. Then, about 60,000 years ago, we left Africa and spread across the world. When we encountered Neanderthals in Europe, we simply replaced them. Completely. No mixing. No interbreeding. They went extinct. We survived. End of story. This was not just science. This was ideology. The idea of separate species kept things clean. Simple. Us versus them. But Pabo's data shattered that narrative. Some scientists fought back. Hard. The DNA must be contaminated, they said. Modern human DNA mixed with the ancient samples during excavation. But Pabo was prepared. He had sequenced 3 different Neanderthals, from 3 different locations, 3 different time periods. All 3 showed the same pattern: gene flow, admixture, interbreeding. This was not contamination. This was history. But the most remarkable discovery was still to come, and it would arrive from a cave in Siberia, from a bone so small you could hold it between 2 fingers. 2008, Denisova Cave, Altai Mountains, southern Siberia. Russian archaeologists are excavating layer 11 of the East Gallery, the deepest, oldest layer, 50,000 years old. They find a finger bone, tiny, from a juvenile. They label it Denisova 3, store it with thousands of other fragments. At this point, no one knows what they have found. They send a sample to Leipzig, to Pabo's lab, for DNA analysis. The mitochondrial DNA comes back strange, not quite Neanderthal, not quite human. Something else, something unknown. Pabo sequences the nuclear DNA, the full genome. And what he sees is impossible. This is a completely new species, a sister species to Neanderthals. They split apart about 400,000 years ago, evolved separately, in parallel. Neanderthals spread west into Europe. This new species stayed east, in Asia. Pabo names them Denisovans, after the cave where they were found. But here is what makes it extraordinary. We have almost no physical remains of Denisovans, just this finger bone, a few teeth, a piece of skull. That is it. Yet their DNA lives on, in modern humans. 5% of Melanesian genomes is Denisovan. People in Papua New Guinea, Aboriginal Australians, Filipino Negritos, they all carry significant Denisovan ancestry, which means Denisovans and modern humans also interbred. Just like Neanderthals and modern humans, multiple species, multiple interbreeding events, across different times and places. Human evolution was not a tree with separate branches. It was a tangled web. Species mixing, separating, mixing again. But the story was about to get even more complicated. 2012. Same cave. Russian archaeologists are still excavating. They extract over 2,000 bone fragments from layer 11. Most are unidentifiable. Too small. Too damaged. Animal or human? Impossible to tell by looking. The fragments sit in storage for 4 years. 2016. Tom Hyam at Oxford University has developed a new technique, zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, ZooMS. It identifies species from collagen proteins, even from bones too damaged for visual identification. His team tests the 2,000 fragments from Denisova Cave, looking for human bones hidden among the animal remains. Fragment DC1227 lights up. Hominin, ancient human. They send it to Leipzig, to Viviane Slon, a young researcher in Pebo's lab. The fragment is minuscule, 2 centimeters long, weighs about 1 gram, a piece of long bone, arm or leg, impossible to tell which. Slon drills a tiny hole, extracts powder, hopes there is DNA left after 90,000 years. She sequences the mitochondrial DNA first. The DNA passed down through the mother's line. It comes back as Neanderthal. Good. Another Neanderthal from Denisova Cave. Not surprising. Neanderthals lived there. But then she sequences the nuclear DNA, the DNA from both parents, and her screen shows something impossible. 2 distinct genetic signatures. 50% of the genome is Neanderthal. 50% is Denisovan. She checks for contamination, runs the analysis again. Same result. She examines different sections of the genome. Same pattern everywhere. She calls Pabo. I think you need to see this. Pabo looks at the data. Silence. Then, this is a hybrid, first generation. Not someone with a Neanderthal great-great-grandfather. Not distant ancestry. This individual's mother was one species. Father was another. This bone belonged to a child whose parents were 2 different species of human, separated by 400,000 years of evolution. They named her Denisova 11, but the world would come to know her as Denny. Further analysis revealed more. Female, at least 13 years old when she died. The bone shows she had reached skeletal maturity. She was becoming an adult. She died approximately 90,000 years ago, long before modern humans arrived in this region. Her mother was Neanderthal, but not from the local Siberian population. Her mitochondrial DNA matches Neanderthals from Western Europe, from Croatia, 3,000 kilometers away. Her mother had traveled across an entire continent. Her father was Denisovan, but his genome also contained Neanderthal ancestry, from hundreds of generations before, from interbreeding events that happened thousands of years earlier. This means Denisovans and Neanderthals interbred multiple times, over hundreds of thousands of years. Whenever their territories overlapped, whenever they met, imagine Denny's world. She was born in a cave in the Altai Mountains, surrounded by glaciers, pine forests, harsh Siberian winters where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees. Her mother was a Neanderthal woman. We will never know her name, never know her story. But we know she traveled thousands of kilometers from Europe to Siberia. Why? Was she migrating with her tribe, fleeing conflict, seeking new hunting grounds, following prey animals? We will never know. But at some point, in this remote cave in the mountains, she met a Denisovan man. Did they see each other as different species? Probably not. To them, they were just humans. Different tribes, perhaps. Different ways of speaking. Different tool-making traditions. But human. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was an alliance between tribes. Maybe it was necessity. 2 small groups in a harsh land, strengthening bonds through marriage. Or maybe it was not consensual. Maybe it was capture, violence. We will never know. But they came together. And they had a daughter. Denny. She grew up in that cave, learning to hunt, to gather, to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. She spoke a language we will never hear, thought thoughts we cannot imagine, had dreams, fears, hopes. She lived to at least 13. Then something happened. She died. We do not know how. Disease, accident, violence. The bone cannot tell us. Her tribe buried her, or left her, or she died alone. We do not know. But her bone remained, buried in sediment, frozen in the Siberian ground, for 90,000 years, until Russian archaeologists found it in 2012. Until Viviane Slon extracted her DNA in 2016. Until the world learned her story in 2018. One bone fragment, 2 centimeters long, 1 gram. That is all that remains of Denny. No skull, no complete skeleton, no artifacts, just this tiny piece. But it tells us something profound. We have found approximately 10 Denisovan individuals total, ever, in all of human history. One of them is a hybrid, 10%. Think about that. Out of the handful of Denisovans we have discovered, one is the child of 2 species. This was not rare. This was not exceptional. When Neanderthals and Denisovans met, they mated. Regularly. Frequently. The same is true for Neanderthals and modern humans. Wherever territories overlapped, interbreeding occurred. This is Romeo and Juliet. Not fiction, not metaphor. Real star-crossed lovers. Across species boundaries, creating children who carried DNA from 2 worlds. But here is the question that haunted Pabo, that haunts us still. If interbreeding was common, if we created families together, if we had children who survived and thrived, why did Neanderthals go extinct? Why do only we remain? The answer lies in the bones, and the bones tell stories of violence. Let us return to Shanidar 3, the murder victim from the opening. Now that we know Neanderthals and humans interbred, we can analyze his death with new eyes. 2009. Anthropologists Eric Trinkhaus and Stephen Churchill publish a detailed forensic analysis of Shanidar 3's wound. They use CT scanning, 3-dimensional reconstruction, biomechanical modeling. They simulate different types of weapons, different angles of impact. Their conclusion is specific, precise. The projectile entered from above and in front, 45-degree angle. It penetrated between the 9th and 10th ribs, pierced the lung, lodged in place. The wound is V-shaped, narrow entry, wider internally, characteristic of a thrown or launched projectile, not a thrusting spear. Neanderthals used thrusting spears, short, thick, designed for close combat. You hold it in your hand and stab, like a knife, effective but dangerous. You must get within a few meters of your prey. By 40,000 years ago, modern humans had developed different weapons. Atlatls, spear throwers that extend your arm's length and power. They let you throw a spear 30 meters or more. Some populations may have had early bows, launching arrows 50 meters or further. The shape and angle of Shanidar 3's wound matches a human weapon. Long range, thrown. Someone from our species killed him, from a distance, before he could fight back. But the bone shows partial healing. New bone growth around the wound. He survived for weeks after the attack, maybe a month, maybe longer, which means his tribe cared for him, fed him, protected him while he was weak, while the wound was trying to heal. Then infection set in, or blood loss became too severe, and he died. This tells us 2 things. First, violence between Neanderthals and humans occurred. Direct, lethal violence. We killed each other. Second, Neanderthals cared for their wounded. They had compassion, empathy. They did not abandon those who could not contribute. Love and violence, simultaneously. Saint-Césaire, France, 36,000 years ago. Another Neanderthal, another wound. 2002. Christoph Zollikofer runs the skull through a CT scanner. The images are clear. a depressed cranial fracture. From a blade, the impact drove bone fragments inward. Forensic analysis shows this was a blow from above, delivered with significant force. The blade struck the top of the skull, fractured the bone, damaged the brain beneath. Survival time? Unknown. But the bone shows healing, thick callus formation. This individual lived for months after the attack. Someone struck them with intent to kill, but they survived. Their tribe nursed them back to health. Krapina, Croatia, 130,000 years ago. Here the evidence becomes darker, more disturbing. 80 individuals, all time periods across 10,000 years. But the pattern is consistent. Cut marks on 70% of the bones, made by stone tools, following specific patterns. Defleshing marks on skulls. Long bones split open, ribs showing butchery, some bones burned. 2020. The Colorado State team arrives. Doctors Glantz, Pante, and Fellman. They bring modern forensic techniques. They photograph every cut mark, measure angles, compare to known butchery patterns. They examine over 300 specimens, looking for answers. Cut mark angle, consistent with deliberate defleshing. Cut mark location, matches animal butchery. Bone breakage pattern, perimortem, meaning the bones were broken when fresh, around the time of death. But here is what makes it complicated. The patterns also match documented burial rituals, cultures that deflesh their dead before secondary burial, separating flesh from bone as a sacred act. Was Krapina a burial site? A sacred place where Neanderthals brought their dead for ritual processing? Or was it something darker? Cannibalism, Neanderthals eating other Neanderthals? The evidence is ambiguous. The debate continues. But one thing is certain. These bones show systematic processing, deliberate actions. Whether ritual or cannibalism, violence was involved. The Neanderthal world was not peaceful. Trauma was common. Healed fractures appear on 30% of adult Neanderthal skeletons. Compare that to Upper Paleolithic modern humans. Same time period, same region, same preservation conditions. Trauma frequency? Nearly identical, 30 to 35%. So Neanderthals were not uniquely violent. They lived in violent times, just like we did. But there is one difference. Young Neanderthals, those under 30, show more trauma. And they died younger. Young modern humans also experienced trauma, but their survival rates were better. They lived longer after injury. Why? Better medicine? Better social care? We do not know. But it suggests a subtle advantage. We were better at keeping our wounded alive. Still, violence alone does not explain extinction. Plenty of violent species survive, thrive even. So what else was happening? Maybe it was not about killing them directly. Maybe it was about outcompeting them, slowly, relentlessly, over thousands of years. This is where the Red Queen enters the story. 1973. Evolutionary biologist Lee Van Valen publishes a paper titled A New Evolutionary Law. In it, he proposes a radical idea. Species do not evolve to adapt to their environment. They evolve to compete with each other. He calls it the Red Queen hypothesis, named after Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. The Red Queen tells Alice, "It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. You are not running to get ahead. You are running to avoid falling behind." In nature, this creates evolutionary arms races. Prey evolve to run faster, so predators must evolve to run faster, so prey evolve even faster. Forever, endlessly, neither side gets ahead. Both must constantly evolve just to survive. Now apply this to Neanderthals and humans. For 300,000 years, Neanderthals dominated Europe. They were the apex predator, the most successful species. They had perfected their way of life. Mousterian stone tools, carefully crafted hand axes, scrapers, points. The technology barely changed for 200,000 years. Not because they were stupid, because it worked. Why innovate when your tools are effective? Why change a successful strategy? They hunted the same way for millennia. ambush predation, get close to large game, use thrusting spears. High risk, but high reward. They lived in small groups, 15 to 30 individuals, extended families. They knew everyone, trusted everyone. They rarely traveled far. 50 kilometers from birthplace was a long journey. Most lived and died within sight of where they were born. This lifestyle was successful, sustainable, for 300,000 years. Then we arrived. Modern humans did not have one strategy. We had hundreds. And here is the key. We were not competing against Neanderthals. We were competing against each other. Tribe against tribe. Group against group. The Red Queen forced us to evolve faster. Not because we were smarter, because we had no choice. Look at the evidence. Neanderthal tools over 200,000 years. Mysterian technology. Same designs, same techniques, minimal change. Human tools over the same 200,000 year span, 50,000 years ago. Basic stone tools similar to Neanderthals. 40,000 years ago. Sophisticated blade technology. Long, thin blades struck from prepared cores. More cutting edge per kilogram of stone. More efficient. 35,000 years ago. Bone tools, needles for sewing clothes, fish hooks, harpoons, completely new materials, new possibilities. 30,000 years ago. Atlatls, spear throwers that triple your throwing distance. Art on cave walls, elaborate burials, jewelry from ivory and shells. 25,000 years ago, microblades, tiny, precise stone tools, composite weapons with multiple parts, nets for fishing, ceramics. We changed every few thousand years, constantly innovating. Why? Because we were competing against ourselves. Imagine two tribes in the same region. One develops a slightly better spear point. They kill more game, feed more children, grow larger. The other tribe must adapt or die. So they develop an even better technique. Longer throwing range, better accuracy, back and forth, generation after generation. The Red Queen running faster and faster. Neanderthals were not part of this arms race. They were stable, successful, unchanged, until we arrived. Suddenly, they faced competition from a species that innovated constantly, that changed strategies every generation, that never stopped evolving. It was not a fair fight, but innovation was only part of the advantage. Social networks. Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups. If your group developed a better tool, it stayed with your group. Maybe you passed it to your children, but it rarely spread further. We created vast social networks, trade routes stretching hundreds of kilometers. We exchanged not just goods, but ideas. Someone in Spain develops a better arrow point. Within a generation, people in France are using it. Then Germany, then Poland. Innovation spreads like wildfire. We find shells from the Mediterranean coast in archaeological sites 500 kilometers inland. Ochre from Hungary and France, flint from Poland in Ukraine. These are not just trade goods. They are proof of social connections. Information networks, more people, more connections, more ideas, faster innovation. Neanderthals could not compete with that. But here is what makes it tragic. We did not set out to destroy them. We were not trying to exterminate another species. We were just living our lives, hunting, gathering, raising children. But our way of life, our constant innovation, our large social networks, created pressure, ecological pressure. We hunted the same animals, occupied the same caves, used the same resources, and slowly, over 20,000 years, we pushed them out, into marginal territories, harsher climates, less productive lands, not through direct violence, though violence occurred, through competition. The Red Queen ran them into extinction. By 40,000 years ago, the last Neanderthals remained only in remote refuges, the farthest corners of their former range. Gibraltar, southern tip of Spain, Gorham's Cave, Vanguard Cave, the most recent Neanderthal sites, dated to 37,000 years ago. maybe as late as 34,000 years ago. The dates are uncertain. Evidence shows they were hunting small game, rabbits, tortoises, birds. Not the large mammals they once hunted. Why? Because the large game was gone, either extinct from climate change or already overhunted by modern humans. They were starving, struggling, making do with whatever they could catch. Imagine their world in those final days. A small band, maybe 20 individuals, huddled in a cave overlooking the Mediterranean. They can see across the water to Africa, where their ancestors came from millions of years ago. They know there are others out there, the strange humans, taller, more graceful, who speak in rapid, complex patterns, who make tools they have never seen. Sometimes these strangers come in peace, trade, exchange gifts. Sometimes they mate with them. The children look different, talk different, eventually leave to join the stranger tribes. Sometimes the strangers come with violence, taking caves, driving them away from good hunting grounds. Year by year, there are fewer of them, more of the strangers. The children born from mixed unions look more like the strangers, act more like them, drift away. Until one day, sometime around 40,000 years ago, in a cave we will never find, the last pure Neanderthal dies. We do not know their name, their gender, their age, their story. We just know that a species that survived 300,000 years, that endured multiple ice ages, that spread across an entire continent, that buried their dead with flowers and cared for their disabled, came to an end, and only we remained, carrying their DNA, but not their culture, not their language, not their identity. 40,000 years have passed since the last Neanderthal died, longer than civilization itself, and yet they are still here. Every time you fight off a virus, every time you feel pain, every time your body responds to stress, you are feeling the echoes of that ancient merger. 2 to 4% of your DNA, if you are not from Africa south of the Sahara, is Neanderthal. They affect your immune system, your skin, your hair, your pain threshold, your fertility, your risk of diabetes, depression, COVID-19. They are dead, but they are not gone. We did not replace them. We became them. This is not a story about extinction. This is a story about transformation, about species boundaries that blurred, about love and violence happening simultaneously, about how evolution does not move in straight lines but in tangled webs. Denny, the 13-year-old girl who died 90,000 years ago in a cave in Siberia. She was proof that when different humans met, we did not see separate species. We saw people. Sometimes we loved them. Sometimes we killed them. This is the greatest unsolved mystery in human evolution. And the answer is uncomfortable, because the answer is us. We killed the Neanderthals, not through one act, through 10,000 acts, across 20,000 years, through competition, through disease, through absorption. The Neanderthals did not fail. They lasted 300,000 years, longer than we have existed. They survived ice ages. They were successful beyond measure. But when they met us, they faced something they had never encountered before, a competitor that never stopped changing. And slowly, inevitably, they faded. Not all at once, not everywhere, but eventually, completely, until only their DNA remained, hidden in our cells, waiting 90,000 years to be discovered, to tell their story. This is not ancient history. This is your history, your DNA, your health, your life. The case is not closed. It never will be. Because every time scientists sequence another genome, they find more Neanderthal genes, more connections, more effects we never knew about. The Neanderthals are still dying and still living inside every cell. They are us. We are them. And that is the answer to the greatest mystery in human evolution. Not who killed the Neanderthals, but how they became us.